Well, good morning, class, and welcome to another episode of Virtual Sunday School. I'm so excited to see each and every one of you, and thank you so much for watching. Today, we're going to learn a very exciting story, and it's around the time of after Jesus' death. So I know we didn't really talk about that yet, but we were talking about the last couple of weeks how Jesus was alive, and he came to heal people, and he was going around to all the towns and he was healing all the little boys and girls. Remember, we talked about that the past few weeks. So now we're talking about a story after Jesus was gone and he went to heaven. So he wasn't around anymore, but his disciples, including a man named Paul, who was a very important person that followed Jesus after his death. So he was telling everybody about Jesus because at first he didn't like Jesus very much. He actually wanted to hurt the people that were preaching about Jesus. But Paul actually became someone who was so in love with Jesus, and he wanted to tell everybody about Jesus. So today is going to be a lesson about Paul and also about a little boy who helped Paul. So back when Jesus died and he wasn't there anymore, a lot of people, including Jesus' disciples and including Paul, a follower of Jesus, wanted to tell people all about Jesus. That means the Romans and maybe people who have never heard about Jesus before because they didn't believe in him. They didn't see his miracles. They didn't believe that he was the Messiah or that he was a very important person. So it was kind of difficult during that time because everybody who wanted to tell people about Jesus, they got in trouble because all of the Roman officers and the people in charge, they were like, no, you can't come here. You're not allowed to come here to my town and tell people about Jesus. Otherwise, you're going to get in really big trouble. So you know what happened? The disciples, including Peter and Paul, who were telling everybody about Jesus, they got in really big trouble in some towns. They got arrested. That means they went to jail because all they were trying to do was tell people the good news about Jesus. So it's kind of a scary time, and that's what happened during this story. So I just wanted to give you guys a little backstory before we get into our story today. So what happened was one day Paul was preaching to the people and he got arrested. That means he was captured by some police officers and they took him to jail because nobody wanted the town to hear about Jesus. Everyone believed in their own thing and they didn't need Jesus. So Paul was in prison. And you can see a picture of a little boy here. This little boy is very important in this story because guess who he was? He was Paul's nephew. So Paul was his uncle, and this little boy, the nephew, knew that Paul was in prison. So it was kind of a scary time, and they didn't know when Paul was going to get out. But one day, this little boy, we don't know his name in the Bible, he's just known as Paul's nephew, he was outside of the temple, and you can see there's a few important Jewish leaders or like some Jews that were outside of the temple. And Paul's nephew heard them say, "We want to get rid of Paul. It's not good enough that he's just in prison. We want him dead. We don't want him to ever tell anybody else about Jesus again." And he might be able to do that if they let him out of prison one day, if they decide they're going to let him out of prison. So we're going to go to the high priest and the people in the temple that are important there, like the chief priest, and we're going to convince them. We're going to take an oath. We're going to tell them, we're not drinking anything or eating anything until you make sure that Paul is dead. And guess who overheard? his nephew. Can you imagine what he must have thought? He must have been so scared. Oh no, they're gonna plan to kill my Uncle Paul. I have to go do something. Well, what was he supposed to do? He was just a little boy, right? Probably like just a little bit older than you guys. So guess what happened? This boy was so brave. He said, I'm the only one that heard this news that they're going to kill my Uncle Paul. I have to do something. There must be something done. So guess what he did? He decided, okay, I'm just going to try to go to the prison and I have to get this news to my Uncle Paul that they're planning on killing him. So he went over to the prison and he went to the person in charge. He said, excuse me, sir, can I go see my Uncle Paul? And the people that were watching the prison, they said, well, he's just a little boy. What's the worst that could happen? He's not very dangerous. So they gave him permission to go see his Uncle Paul. So look, he was there and he said, Uncle Paul, I heard some terrible news. I heard that there were people outside the temple and they were going to hurt you and they wanted to kill you. And I had to come here and tell you, otherwise they were plotting something very terrible that they were going to kill you. And Paul immediately said, wow, God must have sent my nephew at this right time in order to save my life. So do you think that God knew exactly what was happening in this situation? Of course he did. And that's why Paul had no idea, because he was in prison. But he knew that God was up to something and he was thinking of a plan to help save Paul. So Paul immediately, he couldn't do anything because he was in prison. He told his nephew, listen, you have to go to the person in charge, the commander of the prison, and you have to tell him exactly what you heard, okay? So guess what? The prison guard, he said, okay, I'm going to take you to the commander. That's the most important person in the prison. And you have to tell them what's going on, okay? So Paul's nephew went to the commander and he said, listen, I heard this terrible news. Pretty soon, like maybe tomorrow, there's going to be a group of Jewish leaders and the high priest said it was okay for Paul to be taken to the in front of the council. That means like in front of the judge. And on the way there, they're going to kill Paul. So you have to stop them. You can't let them come to the judge, come in front of the judge, okay? Because they're going to kill my Uncle Paul on the way. And you can see the commander, he was really proud of this boy. He said, wow, that was really brave of you to come all the way here and tell me this story so that you could save your uncle's life. That was really amazing. Paul's nephew could have been so scared and maybe he was afraid of what was going to happen, so maybe he wouldn't want to come to the commander at first, or he wouldn't want to come to prison because he didn't know if he was going to get killed or something for coming to see his uncle. But he said, that's okay, I know that God is going to watch over me, right? Because this was all part of God's plan to protect Paul and to make sure that he stayed alive in prison. So what this story is trying to tell us is that even though you're a little boy or a little girl, you may not think you're that important, or you may think, oh, if I heard something that someone's trying to get hurt, who am I? I'm just a little kid. No one's going to listen to me. But you never know if God is using you as someone who's trying to send a message to save somebody's life, maybe, or so that someone doesn't get in trouble. I want you guys to know that even though you're young, it's still really important that you know that God can use you too, and you're never too young to be used by God. Okay, so I hope you like that story, and I hope everyone is sending in their memory verse today, because today is actually the last verse of Psalm 1, and I'm so excited to hear you guys say the whole chapter. So far you've already said the whole chapter. Maybe if you know the whole chapter by heart, you can send it to me, because I would be so happy to hear you guys are memorizing all of these verses, and everyone's doing such a great job. So I love you guys very much, and I hope everybody's staying safe. And we have to pray for some people who are sick, really sick right now. Some people in our church are really sick, and so we want to make sure to pray for everybody for God's healing and so that they can come home soon, okay? So make sure when you guys are praying that you keep them in prayer and we keep each other in prayer, okay? I love you all very much and I'll see you guys next week.